Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Hannibal Season 2, Episode 12, Tome 1. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So we start the episode off with Mason visiting Hannibal in his office, scolding him for interfering between him and Margot and for subverting him and planting the suggestion in his mind with regards to Margot's pregnancy and the ending thereof. And he acts very rudely while in the office, stealing Hannibal's desk chair, putting his feet on his desk, making Hannibal sit off to the side, things like that. This is, of course, offensive to Hannibal. We then move on to Margot looking at the scar left behind by the surgery, which Margot, when she is in a visit with Hannibal and Will, states was purposefully left by Mason. Despite the fact they could have done the procedure laparoscopically, they chose to do it instead with leaving a scar so that she'd always be reminded about what he had done. And of course, they're trying to come up with plans to get rid of Mason, but Margot has lost hope because her father's will, if Mason is lost, then she loses everything too. We then move on to the FBI where Jack scolds Will for, his recklessness, faking, like killing Randall is someone he murdered, and even if that's self-defense, the fact that he mutilated the body afterwards puts Jack in a difficult position. But Will brings him around to basically being like he's a good fisherman. We get some flashbacks to where Will and Jack had a conversation previously while ice fishing about Will being a good fisherman and that the bait needs to be enticing, and that is why he does things like that. And then they talk more plans until Jack brings him in to say he's a good fisherman too and reveals that he has Bedelia. Bedelia is then interviewed by Will, who's given immunity, and she finally discusses more in detail, but not really, about the patient that she had killed, how she had thought it was self-defense at the time, but upon further reflection after, it was only self-defense to a point. After that point, it was murder. How the patient did swallow his tongue, but it wasn't attached at the time. And that is when, that is when Jack, and who's listening, and Will basically inquire to Bedelia about how they're trying to capture Hannibal, and she says, if you think you're close to catching Hannibal, it's only because he wants you to think that, but that Hannibal has a tendency to get lost in self-congratulation, and it is in the whimsy of that he will actually be caught. We then have Will visiting Hannibal, accusing him. Well, they talk for a bit, let's say. And the ultimate conclusion to their conversation is that Will points out all the ways in which Hannibal's influence has been slowly isolating him from other people so that all he has left is Hannibal. For example, he bonds with Abigail, she gets taken away. He bonds with the idea of a child, it gets taken away. He's alienating Alana and Jack, or at least Hannibal believes he's alienating Jack, all at Hannibal's influence and suggestion, and Hannibal does not seem upset about it at all. We then have Jack speaking again to Bedelia alone without Will, and that conversation essentially boils down to Bedelia believing Hannibal has the potential to win their fight and probably will win their fight, so full of confidence in Hannibal's victory. We then have Jack having dinner with Hannibal, where he expresses more doubts about Will and potentially Hannibal, which Hannibal deflects. We then have Will cooking his dogs a very nice meal and feeding them when Mason appears in his car and offers him the chance to get in. We then have Hannibal drawing in his office when 3 goons appear. And he does fight back, but ends up getting tased, though he still gets a stab in on one of their legs. But then he gets tased again, and he ends up knocked out when he comes to. He is strung up in the barn where all of the man-eating pigs are, and Carlos reveals that the guy he stabbed in the leg, Mateo, has unfortunately passed on, and he wants kind of revenge for that. But before he can slit Hannibal's throat, Mason arrives. Mason then takes the knife, taunting Hannibal about how, he shouldn't have interfered. And then Will, who has arrived with Mason, is handed the knife and told to nick Hannibal's throat, not enough to kill him because he wants him to suffer through the pigs eating his lower half first, but they won't continue to eat unless they have a little encouragement, so they need some blood up top, and that's why he wants him to nick his throat. Of course, Hannibal and Will have their soulful eye contact as Will is coming up with the knife, and Will instead decides to cut Hannibal free and is promptly knocked out. Once Will comes back awake, he's still on the platform, abandoned, but you can see blood smears on the platform, and he then uses the mechanism to pull up the rope, and we discover that it was Carlos who ended up being eaten by the pigs, Mason and Hannibal not around. Will then makes his way back home, and he hears Mason giving his dog food, like his dog pack minus Wilson, food, and Will asks him what he's feeding his dogs, and of course Mason is feeding them his face. We then have Will and Hannibal kind of talking with Mason standing in the background about murder or mercy. Mason tries to interfere, so Hannibal suggests he eat his own nose, which he does in fact do. And Will lets Hannibal do what he thinks is best. So Hannibal breaks his neck, but not in a way that would kill him. We then have Jack arriving at Mason's mansion, where he is in his bed and he is seemingly recovering from the cutting off of his own face while drugged. And he essentially pretends he fell in the pig pen. Clumsy, clumsy, clumsy. He says that. And lucky Margot found him, or they would have eaten more than just his face. And eventually Jack leaves, and then Margot arrives and basically tells Mason that she's going to take care of him, just like he took care of her. And then the final scene is Will and Hannibal, seemingly in Hannibal's office or living room, one of the two. And they talk about Patroclus and Achilles, and then they move on to Will saying that their current situation isn't sustainable and that he needs to show Jack his true self. And Hannibal ultimately decides that Jack has become his friend, so he does owe Jack his true self. And that is where the summary ends, and now it's time to rank the episodes, and we'll be ranking on our 2 ranking lists. The mostly objective ranking list, followed by our personal ranking list, which is based on the entertainment value and opinion of the episodes. So, starting up with our mostly objective rank values, we have our single episode supporting character introductions, which of course are the 2 goons, Tommaso and Matteo Deogracias, who dies. Tommaso is completely unknown, but he only appears in this episode. And they're worth 1 point each. We then have our multi-episode supporting character development, which of course is that Carlos, who we'd met previously, does in fact die, which is another 2, bringing us to 4 points. We then have our multi-season supporting character development, which is that Mason loses his face to the dogs and his nose to himself, and that's worth 3 points, bringing us to 7. We then have our impactful, memorable moment line, etc., and there were actually 2 in this episode. The first one, of course, is that Hannibal got strung up in order to be fed to the pigs, and that's memorable just because it's visually memorable. And then the second one, also worth 3 points, was of course Mason getting drugged by Hannibal and then feeding his own face to Will's dogs before eating his own nose. This is very memorable for the entire series. Probably, I would say, second or third most memorable scene of the entire series. And so definitely worth its 3 points, which takes us 13 for this episode, making it a 10 out of 10 episode. And while I could say there is negative messaging or behavior, everyone who's doing the negative messaging and behavior are the villains, and that's just kind of par for the course, expected behavior. So I will put it there because obviously kidnapping, Mason sends his goons to kidnap Hannibal, then of course attempted murder, attempts to kill Hannibal. Will goes willingly, though. Will frees Hannibal, but then the non-consensual drugging and manipulating through the influence of the drugs into cutting off one's own face, and then of course Mason then lies to the cops. So there's quite a bit of negative messaging and behaviors, but again, they're by villains, and this is to be expected of villains to do bad things. So it's just within, like, it's in line with the character for them to be doing these bad things. But for the sake of being fair, I am going to put in negative messaging or behavior. That's minus 2 points. That still leaves us with 11, so it doesn't actually impact the overall score, which is a 10 out of 10, but still felt it was worth mentioning. And that, of course, brings us to our mostly objective ranking for season 2 so far. And in first, we had Kaiseki, Mukozuke, Shizakana, Nakachoko, Konomono, and then this one, Tomewan, is in 6th place. It's in 6th because on the mostly objective, when more than one episode has the same score, it's just ranked in episode order. Then we have Futamono, Yakemono, Suzakana, Hasun, Sakazuke, and Takawase is in 12th place. So now we come to the personal ranking, and just to get it out of the way, I am happy that Bedelia is back as a character. I really like her character design. I like the wardrobe. I like the way she carries herself. I like the way she speaks. I think that's just a really well done character. Now, she didn't have too much impact at this point in her interview, so apart from being happy that the character's back, I don't really have much to say on that. And so we'll move on to the real meat and bones of the episode. And that, of course, was the Hannibal kidnapping, pig almost being fed to pigs, and then the situation with Mason. To start with, I want to give a little insight into how I view things of this nature on TV. For me, there is a very strong distinction between what is reality and what is fiction. A very thick, a very tall adamantine wall between reality and fiction. I understand that fiction is there purely for entertainment. Even if it deals in dark themes, it's entirely fake and it is there for entertainment purposes. Therefore, I allow myself to be entertained by it, even when it deals with things that in reality would be terrifying and horrific. Because it's fiction, I view it in a different light. And I know that not everybody does have that distinction, but I do. So when I say that I was finding it incredibly funny that Mason was having such a great time while he was regrettably drugged against his will with psychedelic agents, and that I thought it was hilarious that like, okay, so Will comes in and he's like, "What are you feeding to my dogs?" And we can see like him holding out a piece of like red, like a strip of red that the dog then eats. And then Mason replies with, "Just me." It's hilarious. Like, that is funny. That's gonna make you laugh. They're making it comedic on purpose, and it is very successful with it. For example, later, you know, Mason has the gall to interrupt Hannibal talking to Will, so Hannibal's just like, eat your nose. And this, of course, immediately catches Mason's attention. He like feels his nose and is like, yeah, gonna do that. Cuts off his nose, eats it, and gives basically like a food review saying that he tastes like turkey gizzard, which I thought was, again, really funny. And then, he'll just quip occasionally, "I'm full of myself," because he ate himself. And I also found it kind of funny in like it's so terrible that it comes back to being funny, because what can you do but laugh at it with Abel eating his own leg at dinner? But this one, they actually put effort into making it funny, and I feel like it was even more impactful because of that, because you couldn't not laugh at it because he was cracking jokes while he was doing it, and it was obviously he was having a great time because he was under the effects of these psychedelic medications, or this powder that was like basically um put into his lungs through a mask that Hannibal had. And that makes it one of the most memorable scenes. Like I said in the earlier segments of the presentation, video, whatever you'd like to call it, he. Okay, wait, I've lost my train of thought. Shoot. Now I remember what I said earlier. There are only one or two actual iconic or memorable scenes that I think are more memorable than this one, but this one's definitely in that top like three most memorable of the entire series, and it was really entertaining. And like I said, like in reality, that would not be entertaining at all. That would be horrific and terrible. But in fiction, because it's fiction and it's there solely for the entertainment of the audience, I allow myself to be entertained. So I found it amazingly great. And it was so great, in fact, that it pushed this episode right up to the top. So on our season 2 ranking so far, I gave it a 10 out of 10, and it's the first of the 10s. Tomewan in first place, Yakimono, Mukozuke, Shizakana, Konomono, Hasun, Kaiseki, Futamono, Suzakana, Sakazuke, Nakochoko, and then in last place is Takawase. Bringing us now to the final segment, which is our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, Season 1 ended with 83.85%, and Season 2 so far has 103 out of a possible 130. Then on the personal ranking side, Season 1 ended with 66.92%, and Season 2 so far is at 105 out of a possible 130. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Hannibal Season 2, Episode 12, Tome 1. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.